equity out of it, but whatever equity you've got sitting in there is probably earning a solid double-digit, very, very attractive rate of return that you would not be able to get in the stock market, predictably, okay? You wouldn't have the tax advantages, and your recourse is, the thing that I tell people, I said, hey, one of the great things about selling your home on seller finance is that the worst case scenario is a best case scenario still.
Hey guys, welcome to the Levelin Up podcast with Brigham Blackham. I've got my good friend George Andersen here. He was actually my coach growing up for tumbling, so I have a near and dear place for him in my heart. But he is a real estate expert, professional in the lending industry, and a magician when it comes to creative financing. So we're going to have a great time talking about how you can buy on terms, sell on terms, and some of the advantages of understanding how to create some seller finance deals that really will create more opportunities for you. So George, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks, Brigham.
Awesome, man. Well, tell us a little bit about your background. I know you're from George of the credit jungle. I think that's such a fun tagline. I watched a couple of your little videos on Facebook. I was like, oh man, you've got so much charisma, and I know you've got some great character in this as well. So tell us a little bit about how you got started. I know that's a long story, but let's hear a little bit of your background and why you're doing what you're doing.
Well, yeah, I just give a brief synopsis on it. I started in the mortgage business in the state of Utah in 1989. And that's what I have been doing full time. And it's still a means of paying the bills, but it's not, my passion has always been real estate. I bought my first investment property in 1992. And one of the experiences that kind of slapped me in the face a little bit is I had been in the mortgage business long enough that I had enough money saved up for a down payment. I had my own house, and I decided, hey, I want to buy an investment property, because back in 92, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac guidelines, you had to have 30% down. That was the minimum down to buy investment property. And I was like, well, hey, I've got that, okay, and I've got the credit and everything else. Well, I found this really cool duplex out in West Valley City, and the guy was asking, it was kind of probably a little bit high on the market, but he was asking 50 grand for it. But anyway, so I went in there and I made an offer, and I said, and I made a full price offer to buy the house, and I was so proud of myself because I knew I could get a loan. And he said, and he goes, I don't want to be cashed out. I'm only going to accept a seller finance offer. And I was like, what? And what I didn't understand at the time was that he had owned the property for so long that it was fully depreciated. So every single dime that he was going to receive was going to be a taxable event. Okay, so it was going to be capital gains plus the interest, anything else that he got on there. And he says, well, what kind of loan are you going to get? And he says, well, I was going to get a 15-year loan. At the time, I think it was a rate of about 8% or something like that. And he goes, well, great, go ahead and put down your 30%, which was $15,000. Okay, but hey, 1992. Okay, but anyway, and all of a sudden, my mind was just kind of like, wow, I just bought this house. There was no appraisal. As a buyer, I didn't pay any closing costs. I own the house, and my payment's the same as it would have been if I would have taken out a loan. And I was like, wow, this is, so it kind of got me going. So, I've had a variety of, I've done a couple of small subdivisions. I've had commercial property. I've had a lot of rental properties. The thing that I really enjoy working with right now is a self-directed Roth IRA. And doing contracts and purchasing contracts, partial assignments. There's so much stuff you can do with a self-directed Roth, and that can be a completely separate class. And I'm probably not fully qualified to dive into that one. But what I thought would be a good thing to share while we have a few minutes together is kind of how to pitch the benefits of seller finance to a seller. Because we know right now that everybody would like to be able to buy a property where the underlying mortgage is, 3%, 2.5%, whatever. And there's tons of those out there, tons of them. Last week, we had the consumer price index that came out from the federal government. And within that consumer price index, about 40% of the weight of that, which is the consumer's cost of inflation, is housing or shelter. Shelter is the component that makes up the biggest part of it. Well, shelter is stubbornly becoming still more expensive. But what they do inside of these reports, they break down each component of the inflation. So what they found in the component is that, multifamily residents, well, there's more multifamily residents coming on the market. That's okay. There's builders are building more. There's more builder inventory coming on the market. And so that's coming up. But guess which number continues to go down? Is existing inventory turnover. And we all know the reason why. It's called the golden handcuffs. I mean, you've got all these sellers that they actually like their mortgage more than their house. Okay. And they're sitting there on a 3% loan, and they're sitting there going, well, why would I go from owing, $300,000 to 3%, sell my house, and then go buy a home that's, $600,000, and then now I owe $500,000 at 6 3/4. I mean, they don't even have to be a math major. Okay. They don't have to know anything. They just kind of go, no, I don't like getting 10% more house and doubling my mortgage payment. So they're staying put. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not people that want to sell, but there's ways that if you can find these people, and I've got a few different methods that I've been experimenting with, and I've had some success with it. I don't claim to have the golden ticket, but I'm willing to share ideas. But if you can, excuse me, but if you can pitch to people, to a potential seller, the benefits of seller finance, if you get a chance to sit down with them and show them how they can create some leverage off of the equity in their home, and not only get more cash, but also sell their home and get cash flow. Most sellers don't have any concept of what that would be. And I think that if you're, willing to just say that, hey, okay, this guy probably isn't going to do a subject to, I'm not going to be able to cash him out and take over his payment and everything like that. You can probably, with a lot more people, you can find a middle of the road compromise that will still be a good deal for you. So that might be something that I'd like to just touch on that a little bit, but answer any questions you guys might have too. So just go ahead, Brigham, with whatever you want to.
Absolutely. Well, I think one of the things that is exciting about understanding, seller financing is that you can start to find win-win scenarios, and being able to really take someone and open their mind and create a reassociation to what is possible when selling their properties. And you're able to go and find more properties because it's not dependent on you getting a loan from a bank. You are able to totally transform the way that you think about acquiring properties and divesting properties. So for instance, like when I sold my house a couple months ago, I did it contract for deed so that I could create some cash flow, because I'm young enough. I don't need to have all the money right now, but I knew that I would double or almost triple my investment if I sold it contract for deed. And we're not going to go a whole lot into that strategy right now, but just know that it is, I have a 3.1% interest, and I sold it closer to a 6% interest rate. And that spread is what I get to keep. And I kept my underlying mortgage in place. You think about all the benefits that can create with cash flow. It is astounding that when we're going through school, we never learn this stuff. It's something that you have to really seek out and find experts. So, George, how did you first understand the power of selling on terms? What was that mind shift for you?
So, like I said, I mean, I had owned several rental properties in the 90s, commercial properties. I mean, I think at one time I had 16 doors, and and then I decided, you know what, I'm not making enough money on this to justify the amount of time that was spent with it, because I was basically becoming my own property manager and general contractor, which I did not want to do. Okay. Right. I'm not good at it. and B, I didn't see that it was going to be something that would, it just didn't make sense. I was sitting there where I'm going to allocate my time. So over a period of time, I ended up divesting myself of everything except some land, so, some parcels that I had. And then, but I understood how it worked, and I had been in the mortgage business, and I had been working with different real estate agents, title companies and stuff that would kind of get their deals that they couldn't figure out. They just kind of go, oh, okay, well, George figures things out, so send stuff over to him. And so I got a lot of tough deals. But anyway, that's where I got acquainted with a mutual friend of ours, Jax Petty at First Liberty Title. And then back after the market collapsed in 2008, Jax approached me and he said, George, I am putting together a class for the Division of Real Estate that I'm going to get approved as a core law class, that real estate agents are going to have to take the class once every 2 years. And I want somebody to come in and teach a section of it that explains how the underwriting guidelines affect a buyer and how they affect a seller. Because one of the worst things that you can do in a seller finance transaction as a buyer is come in and think that you have some expectation that you own the property, only to find out that there could be a variety of issues. Okay, I mean, there could be some title issues.
Mm-hmm.
People talk about the due on sale clause. Personally, I've never bumped into it. I've heard that other people have, but I've said, send me the letter. What'd you get? Let me see what it is. But yet for the buyer, if the buyer has an expectation that I own the house, there are certain things that if you don't set them up with the proper expectations, they're going to find out that, well, maybe I really don't. The forfeiture provisions versus foreclosure provisions, and understanding the difference between that. But right now in the market now, the thing that I think is the conversation that I'm having at least a couple times a week is with real estate agents who've had a home that's been on the market for a while. It's starting to get stale, and the seller does not want to reduce their price. And then they will find out after attending a class, and this is this class that I teach with Jax. We teach it once every month. During the class, we'll sit there and we'll ask them, it says, hey, anybody got a situation where you've got a listing and maybe it's not going as good as you want and everything else? And we ask the question, he says, do you know what the seller's interest rate is on their underlying mortgage if they have one? Real estate agents don't ask that question because, well, we're selling the house. Why does that matter? We're just paying it off. Well, it's amazing how many of these sellers have a second financial asset. I mean, if you own a home right now and you refinanced or bought your home when the rates were down below 4%, and Fannie Mae says that about 50 to 60% of all outstanding mortgages that they're servicing right now are below 4%. Okay, so that's a huge, huge number of people. Well, you have an opportunity to sit down with that seller and explain to them and just say, hey, let me show you a way where you can probably get the full price for your home, okay? But by offering seller finance, you may not get all of your equity, but what you can do is you can, for the equity that you're not getting, instead of getting cash, you can get cash flow. And that cash flow can have some tax advantages to it. It can subsidize the payment on your next house. So maybe you're getting $1,000 or $1,500 a month of cash flow on this house. So now when you go from a mortgage payment of $2,000 a month to $4,000 a month, you don't care because you're getting $1,000 a month in cash flow coming from the house you sold on seller finance. But as a seller, I mean, and I've watched this happen with many instances where they'll sit there and they'll go back and on the same listing, they'll post something like in the seller comments, they'll click the seller finance box and then they'll say, seller is willing to offer 30-year fixed rate financing as low as 5%. Well, all things being equal, if you've got a buyer that's out there looking at the market and they've got 10% down or more, I normally recommend that a seller finance buyer, especially if it's on the market, because you've got to deal with real estate commissions. But 10% down or more, I also suggest to the seller that a 10% down is the greatest insurance policy that you can get. Okay, because somebody that's on a $500,000 home that's coming up with 50 grand, their likelihood of default is pretty slim. And if they do, as you know, with selling your home on a contract for deed, if they default, that's okay. Take the home back and you can sell it again, right?
Right.
So, but it's amazing how many times that these homes that were sitting there get stale, all of a sudden, bang, 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 they're getting interest and then they're getting sold. And then I end up doing the loan, not for the seller finance buyer because they didn't get a loan, but I'm doing a loan now for the seller who sold his home on terms and now wants to go and qualify for the next home. So the interesting thing that we've done in this class, probably the most significant thing, is when Jax and I do the class every year, we have to put together new material, send it to the state, let them know what's changed in order for them to continue to approve the course with an ID number and and the content on there. What's been happening, we've had it happen in 2018, 2022, and 2 times already this year, there have been changes to the underwriting guidelines for a seller who is selling on seller finance as far as their ability to get into another home. And so that's what I've been doing. And then I end up, helping the seller get financing on his next home because most of the lenders are unfamiliar with this stuff. But the key is that there's a lot of potential deals out there. Okay. And if you can, like you were saying, if you can present a win-win situation to the seller and make it a win-win situation for you, I mean, there's tons of transactions out there because you've got all these people that are sitting there thinking, I would like to sell my home, but I can't give up this interest rate. Well, if you can show them how to leverage and create a rate of return, I bet if you sat down, Brigham, on this home that you sold on contract for deed, I mean, I know you know what your internal rate of return is on your equity. You probably didn't get all out of it, but whatever equity you've got sitting in there is probably earning a solid double-digit, very, very attractive rate of return that you would not be able to get in the stock market, predictably, okay? You wouldn't have the tax advantages, and your recourse is, the thing that I tell people, I said, hey, one of the great things about selling your home on seller finance is that the worst case scenario is a best case scenario still. Because it's like, okay, wait a minute, you mean the guy defaulted? Oh my goodness, and I got to take the house back? Well, yeah. I mean, if you've sold it on a contract for deed, that's exactly what you get to do. You get to take the house back and sell it again. So it's a great way to create velocity transactions in the market and help these sellers understand that, hey, you have a second financial asset. Let me show you how to leverage that and still give me as a buyer a great deal where I'm interested in purchasing your home. And guess what? You don't have to live in it. You want to be an investor, you ain't getting no 30-year fixed rate, 10% down with, at 5% on an investor loan right now. So.
Yeah, I think really understanding sellers financing is the difference between someone being a mom and pop type of landlord that they can only have, 8 to 10 properties that they at any given point under their own name, and someone that can scale infinitely. They can have as many as they can get because it's no longer on your credit. It's actually something that you're creating a win-win. And when, let's say 5 years down the road, someone pays you off, you have that big chunk of money. Now you can go do it again with another property. Like, I love the flexibility that it creates. And if it really is all about cash flow, especially when you're young in your career, this is such a helpful way to create cash flow that doesn't depend upon you being a landlord. That's something that I think is huge. So, because right now you said you had 16 properties when you were younger, and you just felt like all of your time was getting stripped away because you're being a general contractor, you're being a handyman, you're doing all the things, fixing toilets and termites and all the different things. But as soon as you sell a house on contract for deed, or you sell it on seller's financing, right? Maybe it's a subject to, and you're able to now be in charge of making sure that the note is paid. Yeah. That's a drastically different level of responsibility. Can you help us understand that in a little bit more clarity?
Well, yeah, I mean, real simply, the difference is that you can be a landlord or you can be a bank.
Mhm.
And if you sell your house on terms, and if the contract is done correctly, you know, you don't get the phone call with, you know, the water heater broke down on Christmas Eve, or, you know, whatever's happening. You don't get to listen. I mean, you can sit and listen to the sob story and everything else. But the thing that I found is that, I mean, I've got several homes, okay, that I have purchased either through traditional financing or through seller financing that I have subsequently sold on contract for deed. And the common denominator among every single transaction that I've done is that if somebody has 10% down or more, they don't default. They just don't. And I think Jax would have a lot more sample size, a lot larger sample size than I would, but I think you would find out that the default rate on somebody who puts down a good chunk is virtually minimum. And the reason is because they have skin in the game, you know,
Yeah.
whether they're an investor or whatever. But the idea is that as a bank, um, I guess some of the technical things is that if you're a landlord, you are putting your properties on Schedule E, okay, where it's, you know, it's basically a profit loss or, you know, an operating statement that's on each individual property. If you've sold the home on contract for deed, which for a seller is what I recommend. I recommend if you're a seller thinking about selling your home, sell it on contract for deed. There's some things in the forfeiture provisions are more favorable under that. And there's some reasons why you'd want to have, even if you're buying a home, it's easier to convince a seller to sell on seller finance if they understand the difference between contract for deed versus all-inclusive trust deed or subject to. But the information that you report on your tax returns, it's dividends and capital gains, okay? Because you're again, you're not a landlord. You're a bank. You're receiving interest. So and then under the landlord tenant statutes of the state of Utah, and I am not an attorney, but I have had this question asked many times in the presence of Jackson. I know his answer is that under a contract for deed or something that's, you know, not a lease or lease option agreement, I mean, you don't, I mean, I had a property, one time where I had, professional, there are some tenants that know how to work the system. Okay. And it's, and I've learned most of the things that I've learned, Brigham, I've learned from bad experiences, not good ones. So
Yeah.
anyways, there's a reason I'm doing what I'm doing right now. So.
Oh, that's true. There are a lot of ways that people can kind of manipulate the system. Maybe they're doing squatters' rights or whatever, that they can really run the landlord around. But when you understand the rules and you live those principles consistently, and you have your standards, like you said, your standard is 10% down minimum. I think that's a great way to make sure they have skin in the game, because their foreclosure rate is going to go down significantly because they don't want to leave that 50 grand in that example you said. They want to make sure that they take care of it. So if we could boil down like the three biggest benefits for a buyer, what are the three biggest benefits to a buyer actually purchasing on terms? Let's talk about that.
Okay, so for a buyer right now, you can it's quite easy. Most of the buyers right now that are buying on terms are getting a better rate with lower closing costs
Yeah.
and a lower down payment than if they were trying to buy it otherwise. And if you're talking about buyers, like somebody who's trying to buy their primary residence, getting into their first home, and they've got a small down payment, okay, they're not going to have as many options as somebody who can come up with the 10%. Are there a lot of deals that you can do with less than 10% down? Of course. Okay. And a lot of people are doing those, but there's a lot more fish in the pond as you have more of a down payment available. There's more sellers that are going to take you seriously.
Mhm.
But as a buyer, I mean, the buyer side on closing costs on seller finance are about $600 versus a traditional mortgage where it'd be about $6,000. So $5,000 less out of your pocket's a big deal. Getting a lower interest rate is a big deal.
Huge deal.
And it's just the ease and simplicity of doing it. I mean, we don't care if you're going to use that as a vacation home or an Airbnb. We don't care if it's owner occupied or non-owner occupied. Seller finance, you don't, I mean, I've got a property under contract right now that is a funky mixed use property. It's got 2 parcels with 1 lien on it right now. The seller's willing to sell, and it's got 1 parcel that's got a little tiny bit of commercial and a little bit bigger residential, and the other parcel's got bigger commercial, a little bit of residential. And this would be a nightmare property to get financing on. I mean, this would be a mess. And you know, we wrote an offer coming in with just a little bit more than 10% down, but to come in and to be able to buy it on terms. And then we said, well, hey, give us five years to be able to do some of the stuff that we want to do to make some improvements, get some cash flow going on the property, and some things that I know that would make the property eligible for financing. And the seller's like, you don't want to beat me up on price. I said, no, your price is fine. I just want, here's the terms that I want. I'm going to put down less money than I'd have to do to get a commercial loan. And I want a better rate than I could get on a commercial loan. And the seller's like, okay. I mean, wrote the offer on Friday. It was accepted on Saturday. So for buyers, there's property situations. I mean, there's all kinds. I mean, there's a list 500 pages long of why you can't get a mortgage. Okay. On seller finance, it's like, well, does the seller want to negotiate terms with me, or he doesn't? If the seller wants to negotiate, then you're okay. You're fine.
Yeah. We'll
So it's
figure out a way that we can
much
have
easier.
it be a win-win, right? That's
Exactly.
really what it comes down to. How good are you at negotiating and finding what they want? And if they're really stuck on the price, great. Let's work on the terms.
Exactly.
And I think that's putting a lot of your skill set to work and being able to recognize different experiences of people that have actually gone in and made money doing this. So that was way more than 3, and I'm so grateful you shared that. So making sure that you've got like the right rate, making sure that over the course of buying not just one property, you can buy multiple properties because you may have a lower down payment. You know, I
Yeah,
think that's huge. You can have multiple units of production.
exactly.
So, what would be one of those red flags with seller financing? You're like, hey, this is, from my experience, you want to make sure you're very cautious when you're doing this. What is one of those red flags that you see over and over? You're like, man, guys, you need to just take the stupid out and do this instead. What are one of those tips you would say?
From a buyer standpoint or a seller standpoint?
Let's say both. We'll start with the buyer and then the seller.
Okay, so from a buyer standpoint, yeah, make sure you close at a title company and that you got that you get an owner's policy of title insurance.
Yes.
Okay, I mean, there's some of these deals, people can be so anxious to do them that they're just done on the kitchen table, and it's not. And I mean,
Oh,
I've got a couple of weird stories that I could tell. I'll spare you, but one of them where the seller of the property was a licensed mortgage loan officer.
mhm.
And he knew what he was doing by not disclosing certain things and just said, oh, don't worry about it. I'm in the business. Let's do it this way. And this was a 7-figure property up in Park City. And the buyer just got torched on it. I mean, it was bad. So I would just say that, you know, for a buyer, if you do buy on a contract for deed, make sure that there is a recorded notice of interest. Okay.
Mhm.
And the reason for that is because once that notice of interest has been recorded, the seller, subsequent to the sale, could file bankruptcy, could have tax liens, could have judgments. They could have any number of things because the seller's name is still on the title of the house. Okay. Any junk, okay, that would accumulate after that, as long as the notice of interest was recorded, those technically become junior liens to what's on there. So it does not affect the buyer. You as a buyer, the seller's stuff, I mean, it's going to affect their equity. If they've got some equity that's trapped in the house, it only affects the seller's portion of the remaining equity. It does not affect yours. And the IRS, if they've sold the house, and this one I have seen, the IRS, they can go ahead and attach the lien, but they can't foreclose on it because you've got a, and I'm going to miss what the term is, but Jack's talked about this and I know what it is, but they can't force it because you are you are the owner of the property. You own it
Mhm.
and you control it, but you're not on title. So the IRS can't force you to pay off that guy's tax liens. They can go in there and they can the only thing they can take from the seller, they can take his cash flow. That's it. They can't affect your equity position. So that would be the thing on a buyer. Close with a title company, make sure you got a recorded notice of interest. If you're a seller, make sure that if you want to, if your intention is to sell your home on terms and then get financing on another home, there might be a handful of lenders out there that understand how to crunch the numbers and make sure that you're writing the right type of contract on the sale of the home. Most of them don't. I get numerous referrals every month from Jacks where it's like, hey, they were told that because they sold their home like this, that they can qualify. Now they find out that they can't. Fortunately, we can go back and we can redo the terms of the seller finance contract to match what Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac want to see so that it doesn't mess up the buyer. But you got to have a buyer that's willing to cooperate with it too. But you want to, as a seller, I mean, whatever terms you agree to. I mean, hey, if your rate's 2.5 and you want to sell seller finance at 3, you know, knock yourself out. I mean, go ahead and do it. But just what's your next step? I mean, are you planning on getting into another home immediately or within the next 12 months or whatever? Make sure that you understand how that affects your debt to income ratios and your capacity to qualify for another home. That's probably all the seller really needs to consider. And then, of course, I would always recommend closing out a title company. And Jack's First Liberty Title is the only one that will actually issue title insurance on a contract for deed. There used to be another title company that did that. The owner of the company, who was an attorney, is retired, and he sold his share of the company to another attorney that wants nothing to do with contract for deed. And he doesn't want the potential liability of having the insurance. But there were 2 choices for that. Now it's down to 1. But it's something that, you know, Jack's basically is putting his personal indemnification on these contracts because he's done enough of them. He's adjudicated them in case and, you know, in court before, so he knows what's going to happen on their both sides of it. And so his contracts are good, and he's got a couple of different title insurance companies that'll say, oh yeah, well, if Jax is closing the transaction, we'll issue title insurance on that. And that's a big deal. So
yeah, title insurance is huge. If you don't have that, you don't even know if there's any liens, if there's clouded title. It's really pretty scary. So I think it's fantastic advice to make sure you close at a title company and you have your contracts written correctly so that you can
by
get
an attorney.
That's
huge.
huge.
Because there's, you know, when you go close at a mortgage company, those contracts are drafted by attorneys. The escrow officer at the title company is not drafting documents. Okay. All they're doing is following instructions, and they've got a stamp, a notary stamp. Okay. Not to take away from what they're doing, but a seller finance contract, there's a state approved form for an all-inclusive trust deed or for a trust deed and note, but there's no state approved form for a contract for deed. There used to be, and they took it off the system about a year ago. Because they were just like, well, you know what, we got too many people that aren't doing it correctly. But we have cumulatively since 2009, I think we're up over 11,000 now, people that we've had that have taken the class and have gotten credit for it. So it's a good class to learn the basics.
Yeah, and you have to understand the basics before you can go and do it well. So I really appreciate you sharing some of these insights. Now, if you were going to give one piece of encouragement to new investors, those that are maybe just starting out, maybe they have less than 10 properties and they're just wanting to scale their business, what would be that one piece of encouragement that you'd give them so that they can get to that next level?
I don't know. I was hoping you'd give me some advice on that. I'm always looking to pick up something else.
I love it.
You know, there are some interesting sources. I mean, one of the sources that I've had for 2 transactions that I've done this year, properties that I've picked up and done in my Roth, have been from bankruptcy attorneys. So bankruptcy attorneys, divorce attorneys, they're good sources of information. The one thing I can tell you about them is that if you can show them a way that the client can stay in the home because every real estate agent and investor that comes up there and says, well, I've got a great deal for you, but you have to sell your home and move. You're not going to get a referral from the attorney. Okay. Because they're going to go, and he says, well, that's what every real estate agent tells them to do, is it's like, I got a great deal for you. I'm going to give you your money and you can move out. Well, they're trying to figure out how to keep them in their home. So if you can come up with a solution that would do that, there's lots of very good ways to create win-win situations for that. And then just don't limit yourself. There are some transactions. I've run into some deals before where they're really good and the timing sucked because I didn't have all the money that I wanted to have to be able to do it. So I've brought in a partner. I've brought in a partner on it. I've got a couple of my friends. I know that you know a couple of them if I drop names, just prominent people down here in San Pete. But yeah, I mean, it's just been like, okay, look, I mean, I found the deal and I need some help putting it together with some extra money. And most of the investors, they're okay giving you a little bit more, what do you want to call, preferred stock treatment, because you're the one bringing the deal to the table. So just because you may not have all the money available, don't limit yourself. Go out and find deals. And when you got a deal, I mean, you can always wholesale a deal or something like that, but a lot of deals, they're worth buying and getting into them long term and creating the cash flow, which you've talked about.
Yeah, I think that's huge. And then finding ways that you can not just do it once, but get comfortable going and doing it over and over and over again. Because at some point you have to stop thinking, oh, I have to have the money myself to be able to do deals. If you create the value of finding a great deal, money will come. You need to have the conversations, and you need to consistently have those conversations so you can find that private money, and you can make it a win-win with you, and then a win-win with the seller, and eventually everybody wins. I think it's such a cool thing about real estate. Anytime you're fixing up a property, every contractor that comes in, they're feeding their family, their subcontractors, they're feeding their family. And there's enough meat on the bone when you know how to run your numbers and you know how to identify opportunity. And I think what you brought up today is one way that we can really identify some awesome opportunities in the market. So thank you for sharing, man. I love being able to connect, and man, it's so much fun to hear you in your element. I mean, we knew each other when I was in middle school, and you're teaching me how to do backflips and not hurt myself, which was awesome. I ended up using that.
I think I'm more of I call it a stumbling coach now, because I can't do anything anymore. If you can't do it, you probably shouldn't be teaching it. So
there you go. A stumbling coach. I love it.
Yeah.
Man, I appreciate you. Thank you so much for all you do and who you are. I think it's one thing to be able to do something really well, but it's another to be able to live a really well principled life. And I really appreciate you being a good person as well as doing good business. So thank you for all
Thank you, Brigham. Yeah, I appreciate that. It's been a pleasure. It was just so cool to bump into the other day, and then just to find out that we're kind of on the same path here too. So,
absolutely.
But yeah, you're doing some good stuff here, and yeah, and it's all about the abundance mentality. I mean, right now there are so many sellers out there that would entertain a seller finance offer to sell their home if you can educate them of the benefits for it. And I just think there's so much stuff that people are, just not engaging in, I mean, you just got to go and take that first step. So.
Exactly. So guys, once again, thank you so much for being on, George. Thanks for being here with us today, guys. Seller financing is absolutely something that you want to learn and master so that you can make more offers and make a deeper impact with your finances and those of others. So thank you for being here. Continue to like and subscribe. Hit that notification bell. We want to make sure that we continue to help you guys in every way that we can. So George, how do people find you online? I want to make sure that they know.
Okay, so I've got my website's kind of under reconstruction right now, so it's pointing to my Facebook page, my business page, but thecreditjungle.com. So if you go to thecreditjungle.com, all my contact information is there. I've got a YouTube channel under the same title. I have got well over several dozen videos that are on seller finance, and they get down into, I mean, I'm on a whiteboard crunching it down, just breaking it down on what a buyer's offer looks like, what the sellers look like. there's a lot of information on there, and anybody that wants questions, I answer questions on YouTube all the time too. But so yeah, so thecreditjungle.com, and you'll find me.
Great. And I'll make sure to put that in the show notes as well. So guys, thank you so much for being here. And if you want like a really long version of what we can do with seller financing, we also have that in our test drive, and I'll put a link in that description as well. That gives you like 8+ hours on how to really go in depth and make sure you understand these transactions. So thank you so much for all you do, guys. It is a pleasure to have you on, and keep leveling up. God bless.